The Ottoman Empire's debt trap. How Britain bought the Middle East. This is not a metaphor. It is a paper war, waged with bonds, concessions, and signatures that reshaped an entire region. By the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire, once the terror of Europe and the guardian of three continents, was no longer being conquered by armies alone. It was being hollowed out by debt. By 1875, in Constantinople, the Sublime Porte stood on the edge of financial collapse. European creditors watched closely, among them Great Britain. What began as loans to stabilize a struggling empire would become a mechanism of control. Railways, ports, telegraph lines, oil. Little did the Ottomans know, every signature they placed on a loan agreement tightened a foreign grip around the Middle East. What happened next would become legendary, not for a single battle, but for a silent takeover that would echo through World War I, the fall of the empire in 1918, and the borders that still defined the modern Middle East. By the mid-1800s, the Ottoman Empire was already being called the sick man of Europe. Its territories stretched from the Balkans to Arabia, but its finances were in ruins. Decades of war against Russia, internal revolts in the Balkans, and costly modernization efforts had drained the treasury. The empire needed railways, modern armies, and administrative reform, but it lacked capital, so it turned west. Beginning in 1854, during the Crimean War, the Ottomans took their first major foreign loans, primarily from British and French banks. The interest rates were punishing. Middlemen took huge commissions. Only a fraction of the borrowed money ever reached Ottoman coffers. By 1875, the empire could no longer pay. It officially defaulted on its debt. This single moment changed everything. European powers did not respond with armies, they responded with accountants. In 1881, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, the OPDA, was imposed. It was not Ottoman, it was European. British, French, German, Austrian, and Italian officials took direct control over key Ottoman revenues, salt taxes, tobacco monopolies, and customs duties. Fear gripped Ottoman officials. The empire still ruled its lands, but no longer its money, and Britain was watching closely. By 1900, British influence had embedded itself deep into Ottoman infrastructure. This was not accidental, it was strategic. Railways became the arteries of empire. Britain backed lines connecting Mediterranean ports to Mesopotamia, ensuring access to trade routes and, more importantly, future oil fields. Telegraph cables followed. British-controlled communications linked Cairo, Basra, and India, binding the Middle East into London's imperial nervous system. By 1908, oil had entered the equation. The British government quietly supported exploration in Persia. When oil was discovered, Britain moved fast. In 1914, just weeks before war erupted, the British Admiralty bought a controlling stake in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. The Ottoman Empire now sat between Britain's crown jewel, India, and its most vital resource, oil. By 1914, the debt trap was complete. The Ottomans owed more than £140 million, an astronomical sum for the time. British and French bondholders effectively dictated economic policy. German influence grew as well, especially through the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, intensifying imperial rivalry. Then came the spark. In August 1914, Europe plunged into war. Against impossible odds, the Ottoman leadership believed alignment with Germany offered a way out: military protection, debt restructuring, and freedom from British financial dominance. They chose war. Little did they know the price would be the empire itself. World War I turned the debt trap into a noose. British strategy shifted from finance to force. The goal was no longer influence, but control. In Mesopotamia, British Indian Army units advanced from Basra in 1914, officially to protect oil installations. In reality, they were seizing economic assets long coveted by London. The Ottoman army, under-equipped and overstretched, fought back with sheer determination. Soldiers endured searing desert heat, shortages of ammunition, and the constant thunder of British artillery. By 1916, Britain escalated the conflict in secret through correspondence between Sir Henry McMahon and Sharif Hussein of Mecca. Britain promised Arab independence in exchange for revolt. Gold flowed. Rifles followed. The Arab Revolt erupted in June 1916. Ottoman supply lines collapsed. Garrisons were isolated. Railways, once symbols of modernization, became targets for sabotage. At the same time, British and French diplomats met behind closed doors. In May 1916, the Sykes-Picot Agreement carved the Middle East into spheres of influence before the war was even won. Fear, betrayal, and exhaustion gripped Ottoman commanders. They fought, knowing that even victory might not save them from debt. By 1918, famine ravaged Syria. Disease swept Anatolia. The empire was bleeding men and money it no longer had. The crisis reached its breaking point. The turning point did not come on a battlefield, but at a desk. In October 1918, the Ottomans signed the Armistice of Mudros. British warships anchored in the Bosphorus. Constantinople was occupied. The debt trap snapped shut. British officials moved swiftly to secure mandates under the new League of Nations system: Iraq, Palestine, and Transjordan. These were not random borders. They followed oil fields, pipelines, and former Ottoman revenue streams. Ottoman debts were selectively enforced. Assets were seized, concessions rewritten. Britain emerged not just as victor, but as creditor. For the Middle East, the consequences were permanent. What happened next would become legendary, not as liberation, but as the beginning of a century of instability. The Ottoman Empire was formally dissolved in 1922. In its place rose new states, many burdened by the same financial structures that destroyed their predecessor. Britain had not conquered the Middle East with mass armies alone. It had bought it, installment by installment. Railways became pipelines, loans became leverage, debt became destiny. The human cost was immense. Millions displaced, centuries-old systems erased, promises broken. Yet from the ruins emerged resistance, nationalism, and the long struggle for true sovereignty. The legacy of the Ottoman debt trap still echoes in borders drawn by creditors, in conflicts rooted in economic control, and in a region forever shaped by decisions made far from its deserts. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWI Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.